House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. So you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Keep in mind the Board of Internal Economy's guidelines for mask use and health protocols. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments by members should be addressed through the chair. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk will advise the chair on whose hands are up to the best of his ability, and we will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Pursuant to the order adopted by the House of Commons on Tuesday, December 7th, 2021, and the motion adopted on Tuesday, December 14th, 2021, the committee is resuming its study of gun control, illegal arms trafficking, and the increase in gun crimes committed by members of street gangs. With us today, live and in person, the Honorable Marco Mendicino, Minister of Public Safety. They're very much alive, but they're not in person, are John Osowski, President of the Canada Border Services Agency, Scott Harris, Vice President, Intelligence and Enforcement Branch, from the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Talal Dakalbab, Assistant Deputy Minister, Community Safety and Countering Crime. From the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, Brenda Lucky, Commissioner, and Stephen White, Deputy Commissioner, Specialized Policing Services. Colleagues, just so you know what we're going to do with time allocation, when you've got 30 seconds left, I will do this. And for anybody who can't see it, I will whisper 30 seconds and be as gentle as I can be and as respectful as I should be about time allocation. Welcome to all. I now invite Minister Marco Mendicino to make an opening statement. Over to you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and indeed it is good to be appearing before this committee in person. J'aimerais commencer par reconnaître.
I'd like to begin by acknowledging that those of us on the Hill are gathered on traditional Algonquin territory. Thank you for inviting me here today. Colleagues, I've been closely following the testimony delivered to this committee over the last few months. You've heard some compelling and eye-opening accounts, including some remarkable grassroots initiatives making a difference. You heard about OPK in Winnipeg. You heard that Indigenous men and women were empowered to find a way out of gang life through the program's consultation and access to community resources and connections. You heard about Bear Clan Patrol, also based in Winnipeg, providing security for the Indigenous community and helping keep the peace in a supportive way. And you heard about Straight Up, serving the at-risk Indigenous community in Saskatoon, working with ex-gang members and their families, and supporting individuals as they embark on a healthier path. The numbers don't lie. Through programs like this alone, thousands of hours per year of personal skills development and employment training have helped empower personal change, a sense of hope, and an alternative to gang life. At the provincial level, you heard about the work of British Columbia, whose Combined Forces Special Enforcement Unit has an Endgame Life program providing support to gang members to help them leave that lifestyle. And you heard about initiatives in Quebec taking robust action through projects like Opération Centaure. In that province, the project is helping to provide more police officers, forensic scientists, and corrections officers to support intervention and information sharing. And it's bringing together law enforcement agencies to investigate and prevent gun violence and reduce smuggling.
Warmly welcome the attention you and this committee have been paying to initiatives that have been put into place across the country. I look forward to discussing this and much more with all partners at the upcoming number of engagements that we have across the country. Colleagues, along with positive signs of progress, you've also heard firsthand accounts of the shared challenges we all face in tackling gun violence. I'd point to the testimony of the Vancouver Police Department Staff Sergeant Michael Rowe. He pointed to the challenge of ghost guns, or firearms produced in part by 3D printing. They're manufactured or assembled from components without a serial number or other markings, making them difficult to detect by conventional systems and difficult to trace. It's a reminder that we're all operating in an evolving and complex environment. It's a reminder that through times of change, we all need to work closely together at every level and in every community. Mr. Chair, at my last appearance, I provided an overview of how the federal government is playing a leadership role to do just that. I noted that we've introduced the strongest measures to fight gun violence our country has ever seen. I highlighted how we've focused on controlling the use and possessions of firearms. For example, through measures now in place allowing for lifetime background checks, including criteria that must be considered in deciding whether to grant a firearms license. I pointed out the ways in which we're limiting access to firearms deemed inappropriate. For example, our ban of over 1,500 models and variants of assault-style firearms, with a buyback regime on the way. I talked about how we're tackling illegal firearms, for example, by committing to increasing the maximum penalty for firearms trafficking, smuggling, and related offenses from 10 to 14 years imprisonment. I spoke about our efforts to reduce gang membership and violence. Those prevention efforts are essential because the fight involves more than just enforcement. As my colleague Minister Blair has often said, you can't arrest your way out of the problems on our city streets. And that's why to date, we've delivered more than $115 million in provinces and territories to support prevention, to support intervention, to support the suppression and enforcement activities under the Guns and Gangs Violence Action Fund since 2018. I'll add that we've also allocated $250 million over 5 years directly to municipalities and Indigenous communities, demonstrating a history of gun and gang-related harm who will receive funding to bolster gang prevention and intervention programming. Mr. Chair, I also talked about how enforcement investments to deter smuggling and trafficking are making a difference. As members know, the CBSA seizes large quantities of firearms every year from the United States citizens, mostly from non-compliant travelers attempting to retain their personal firearms while traveling. Firearms tracing is also a key tool in determining the sources of and diversion routes for illegal firearms. Approximately 21,000 firearms are seized annually by law enforcement, and our $125 million in support for the RCMP and CBSA to stop illegal guns at their source and to detect and disrupt gun smuggling is already paying dividends, with over 1,000 firearms seized at the border last year. I also highlighted that we have invested an additional $312 million over 5 years to enhance our capacity to better identify, disrupt, and prevent firearms from entering the illicit market. That includes $15 million to increase the RCMP's capacity to trace firearms and over $40 million for anti-smuggling activities, which includes building a new Canadian criminal intelligence system that will help law enforcement to target and disrupt criminal activity. We've seen concrete evidence of the difference these investments are making, complementing the testimony that you've heard. Just look at the results of the CBSA's investigation into 3D printed firearms last year. It showed that the work of the CBSA and RCMP after detecting and intercepting undeclared firearms parts in Mississauga led to seizures, warrants, and arrests through strong action at the border and collaboration with many partners. Mr. Chair, at the same time, I acknowledge that there is more work to be done. I want to reinforce the government's commitment to collaborating with provinces who want to take action in banning handguns, an issue I discussed with my provincial and territorial colleagues last week at our federal, provincial, and territorial conference. And while this committee studies the issue of gun control, illegal arms trafficking, and the increase in gun crimes committed by members of street gangs, I look forward to your consideration and debate of new firearms legislation, which we will table soon. Mr. Chair, I want to close by thanking again all of the members of this committee for their thoughtful work, and I look forward to taking your questions and comments. Merci.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you for the generosity of your time. Leading off the first round in a 6-minute slot will be Mr. Lloyd. Over to you, Mr. Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming, Minister. I appreciate all the times you've been coming before our committee, and I appreciate that you seem to have been watching the testimony that we're seeing in the committee. And I agree with you, it has been compelling testimony, but what I think you've been, and some of the testimony that you've mentioned today has been strong, but you have been cherry picking some of the testimony because we've seen overwhelming testimony from law enforcement, from community activist groups that are doing the great work in the communities you talked about, and a number of victims' rights groups that have said that your government's proposed mandatory gun buyback on law-abiding firearms owners is the least effective and most expensive policy you can take. What do you say to that, Minister?
Well, the advice that we get from law enforcement is important. And for example, as I mentioned last time, Mr. Lloyd, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police did support our ban on assault-style firearms. We're going to listen to victims groups as well. What I would say, and I do think that there is an important distinction between the strategy that we've put into place around introducing stronger gun controls, whether they be with regards to AR-15 and assault-style weapons, or with regards to the additional steps we want to take on handguns, that the extension of introducing a ban would be to also have a buyback program put into place. And the reason, Mr. Lloyd, is that we are concerned that those guns which were once legal but have now been deemed illegal could be stolen, could be used, and could be used to kill and hurt people. And we've seen that in some recent shooting tragedies, including in my hometown in Toronto. So that's why we propose to introduce the buyback program.
Minister, you know, we live in an economic scarcity. We have to use taxpayer dollars for the best possible use. We have seen statistics from law enforcement, from community groups that have overwhelmingly shown that legally owned firearms are not winding up in the hands of criminals. Like overwhelmingly, certainly there are a few exceptions, that these are guns that have been transported and smuggled over the border. Now, you posted on Twitter today a gun bust of 2 rifles and 4 handguns. And in your own words, most of the guns that are being intercepted by CBSA are from non-compliant travelers, not from organized crime smuggling operations, which is what we know is the main source of guns getting into the hands of criminals. Minister, why are you paying attention to guns seized from American travelers when you're missing the real issue, which is the thousands of handguns that are being brought over the border from the United States by organized crime?
Well, first, we have an obligation, and CBSA discharges their responsibilities to ensure that no one who is permitted to bring firearms into the country is not able to do so, and that is a matter of public safety, and I would think you would agree with that, Mr. Lloyd. Secondly, I would point out that we have made significant investments to ensure that organized crime is interdicted at the border, and I would point out that last year CBSA and RCMP carried out a number of operations which led to a record number of arrests and seizures, over 1,000 firearms seized, which could have made their way into our streets, into our communities, where they carry out deadly consequences. So my point to you, Mr. Lloyd, is that we're able to do both. We're able to both interdict at the border official ports of entry where people are not able lawfully to bring in their firearms, but we're also able to attack organized crime to ensure that we are maintaining public safety by taking aggressive law enforcement action at our borders.
Minister, you know, while I do applaud the work of CBSA in interdicting illegal firearms from non-compliant travelers, from organized crime, clearly it's not enough. We are still seeing many firearms being brought to Canada that are being smuggled, and we're seeing the government pursue a course of action to seize the firearms of law-abiding firearms owners, spending upwards of $1 billion or more in this effort. And we're seeing, you said, $40 million for the border. Why is this government spending $1 billion on a gun buyback that law enforcement and community groups are saying will not work, instead of spending more money on getting youth out of crime, disrupting organized crime, and stopping the flow of illegal guns at the border?
Mr. Lloyd, the government is committed to doing more, which is why we increased the amount of funds and resources that we have invested in our CBSA, in our RCMP. We will continue to take the steps that are necessary to give them all of the personnel that they need, all of the equipment that they need, the technology that they need. We're also leveraging partnerships with our American counterparts. There's a cross-border crime forum that I hope to be engaging with my counterpart, the Secretary of Department of Homeland Security, in the very short term. And it is a full court press. That is my response to you when it comes to action at the border. But we also have to be sure that we are investing in preventative strategies, and I'm sure that I'll have an opportunity to expand on that as well.
Thank you, Minister. One thing that was actually very clear from law enforcement and from community groups during this committee study is that there's a certain amount of time that's needed in order for rehabilitation to work in the correction system. And by your government reducing mandatory minimums for gun offenses and other violent offenses, we could be seeing these criminals spend less time in prison, which has been shown to reduce rehabilitation rates. What do you have to say about that?
Well, Mr. Lloyd, as you know, I spent over a decade on the front lines of the criminal justice system and had a very unique and informed perspective on how mandatory minimums work and how they don't work. And our government believes in restoring the judicial independence in our courts, which was deteriorated the last time the Conservatives had the reins of government. But also, we acknowledge that where you have hardened organized crime who are participating in the illegal trafficking of guns for the purposes of visiting devastating consequences in our community, that there needs to be an appropriate sentencing regime, which is why we are going to be increasing maximum penalties for those serious firearms-related offenses from 10 to 14 years, and we trust that the courts will dispense those sentences where appropriate in accordance with the principles under the Criminal Code and the Charter.
Thank you very much, Minister. Now we invite Mr. Noor Mohammed to take us through this next round of 6 minutes of questioning. Mr. Noor Mohammed, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, everybody. Thanks for appearing, Mr. Minister, and to officials. I'd like to ask my first question to Commissioner Lucky. We heard from the folks at the Vancouver Police Department on a wide range of issues. They raised a couple of points. The first point was that they would certainly support the outright ban of high-capacity magazines, and they spoke to the need to regulate firearms or replica, imitation, and airsoft guns that aren't necessarily firearms nor replicas. Would you agree with the VPD, Commissioner Lucky?
Thank you for that question. I would agree with anything that to reduce the guns that are used in crimes, or any parts of the guns that make it more accessible or make that firearm more available. And so anything that would reduce any type of crime with handguns, I would be supporting.
Thank you, Commissioner. And what about the components required to make guns at home? Would you be in favor of more regulation? Would you be in favor of trying to find ways to stop people from being able to make their own guns at home?
Yes, absolutely. Those parts put together obviously can create a handgun, and those parts often are imported in pieces that make it, available to put guns together. And so, yeah, that obviously, when they're used for criminal intent, we need to get those off the street.
Thanks, Commissioner. Well, Minister, you've now heard from the Commissioner of the RCMP. You've heard from the Vancouver Police Department. What say you about the need to support the ban on high-capacity guns, and what say you about the need to regulate guns that don't, or these things that don't fall into the category of firearms replicas, and what say you to the regulation of components that allow people to make their own guns at home?
Well, thank you, Mr. Nur Mohammed, for raising what is a very legitimate concern around the way in which both guns as well as the different components and elements of guns can be used to great devastating effect. And I want to assure you and all members of this committee that we plan to take very proactive legislative reform going forward. I will say that that the legislation that we are actively contemplating does seek to address the very issue that you have put your finger on. We need to be sure that that we send a very clear message to those who would try to alter cartridges, to those who would try to use different components to increase the deadly force that guns can carry out with devastating effect, that is unlawful, and that if you break the law, that there will be serious consequences. And we plan to give law enforcement all of the tools that they need to ensure that those new laws are able to be enforced once they're on the books.
Sure. You know, you talk about the importance of being able to give everybody the tools that they need. One of the challenges is that folks are fighting the tool of misinformation in all of this. And there are folks that have advocated for setting up NRA-style gun lobbies in Canada and have been working hard for this. What is the contribution that those types of organizations have in making it harder for legislation to occur around issues like the ones that we've just spoken about? And then, Commissioner Lucky, perhaps you can weigh in on how much it makes your job harder in policing.
Well, I'll say very briefly that I am concerned about the degree of disinformation that has made its way into social media. I worry that for very deliberate purposes, the efforts of the government, the way in which we are trying to communicate our strategy at reducing gun crimes is being distorted in a way to raise fears among law-abiding citizens to whom we have the greatest amount of respect for. I've visited with hunters. I've visited with those who participate in target shooting, and frankly, I applaud the measures that they put into place to use their firearms in a way that is safe. But what worries me is that the steps that we're taking through legislation, the investments that we're putting into law enforcement at our borders, in our communities, the strategies that we're deploying to prevent gun crime from being put into place to minimize those consequences is being distorted in a way that is reckless and wrong. And we need to just be very clear-eyed about that.
Thank you. And Commissioner Lucky, what does that do to the work that you need to do from a policing perspective?
Well, thank you for that question. When we deal with misinformation and disinformation, obviously it first of all, it causes, other things to happen criminally often. It causes people to be more defensive. And so it creates an environment where people feel they have to protect themselves sometimes. The other thing it does is it diverts our resources that we could be using on frontline enforcement. It takes it off that and diverts it so that we can verify the information, follow up on the information, correct the information, and re-enter information, correct information. So obviously it does divert us from what we need to do.
Sir, what would you say to folks that believe that gun buybacks and further enforcement is an attack on innocent law-abiding civilians?
I would say that with our government, what Canadians will receive is responsible and strong gun control to protect our communities. And where we introduce buyback programs, it is an essential tool at getting guns which have no business in our communities because they only have one purpose, which is to kill people off our streets, and that's our commitment, and we're going to make good on it.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Michaud, your turn. You have 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's nice to see you in person. Thank you, Minister, for attending this meeting. You will recall that the last time you were here, I asked you a question about the famous firearms route in Quebec, which we're very aware of, Akwesasne and other places. Their smugglers are very familiar with this route. They know how to take advantage of this route. And at the committee, we received from the Mohawk Akwesasne Police Department report saying that they're very worried about it, they want to do more, and that they're not consulted enough. The Bloc Québécois has proposed that we have some type of a joint operation with other police departments, not only to exchange information, but to really get to these people that are on the ground, talk to them. And what we heard is that there's a lack of information being shared on the ground, both from the and also with police on the other side of the border. That is the New York Police Departments, the OPP, the SECU, the SBSA, the RCMP. So if they could all talk to each other better, this might have an impact, and it would help the Akwesasne Police Department that does not feel it's being consulted enough. Is that a desire of your government to consult the Akwesasne Police Department more? Thank you very much for your question, Ms. Michaud. First of all, I fully agree that we have to remain in contact with Indigenous communities, not only in Akwesasne, but also throughout Canada. I do know that the police departments, the RCMP, the CBSA, and the provincial police forces hold a lot of fora where they share information aimed at stopping trafficking and traffickers of firearms across the border. It's not an easy task. There are a lot of challenges, but that's why the government is continuing to enhance resources, to increase funding, to provide tools to the police departments at the border. But I do agree with you. We have to remain in contact with them. We have to cooperate with the Indigenous police departments, and that's exactly what police officers are doing on the ground. Thank you, Mr. Minister. Yes, it is not an easy task because despite the cooperation, which is done in good faith, I'm sure, there are lots of firearms that cross the border every week that they end up in the street gangs in Montreal and elsewhere. This is most unfortunate. And one of the solutions that the police department at Akwesasne is proposing, and I followed up with them further to your testimony at the committee, it's to recognize them as an essential service. And the police chief seems to be in discussion with the federal government on that very matter. And recommendations have come out of the last year's report. That is, that we recognize the police force as being an essential service. Is that in your plans? Do you intend to recognize Indigenous police departments as essential departments? This may help us deal with this issue. That's a very important question, Ms. Michaud. At the last FPT last week, we had a meeting with the leaders from Indigenous groups, and this issue was raised by the leadership. The whole issue of the interpretation of Indigenous police departments as being an essential service was discussed. The government is truly open, and we're working with Indigenous communities on this very matter. Now, we have to continue working closely with them. For instance, we have a few programs that have been implemented to provide more resources to Indigenous communities, and I know and I understand that we have to do more, and that the government wishes to do that. I have a few minutes remaining. You talked about resources. The border union said that they don't have enough human and financial resources, and that their expertise is not being used fully, in the sense that there's not enough communication between the various border crossings. And here we're talking also about rail transportation, boats arriving in the Montreal port. Are you going to provide the border officers with more resources? I have enormous respect for everybody who works on the front line, and that's the reason why we are continuing to add financial resources to help them, and we're going to listen to their expertise. Thank you.
I'll turn to Mr. McGregor, who has 6 minutes to end this first round of questioning. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Minister, thank you for being here, and appreciate your opening statements and the responses you've given to my colleagues. You and I were both here during the 42nd Parliament when your government introduced the Cannabis Act, and I remember a lot of the rationale for that act was a sense that it is wrong to continue to charge and prosecute people through the criminal justice system for personal possession and use of cannabis. And indeed, we had it confirmed by Ottawa lawyer Michael Spratt during his testimony before the committee of how he used to have a fair number of clients who were, his to shepherd through the justice system for cannabis-related offenses, and that dropped down to 0 after the passing of the Cannabis Act. So it had its desired effect. The problem is, though, is that for many opioid substances, they're still on the books under our Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. We have had testimony, and indeed it's very public, proclamations from the City of Vancouver, the Government of BC, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, calling for decriminalization. And indeed, I was very moved at this committee when Staff Sergeant Michael Rowe of the Vancouver Police Department made that very clear connection between the profitability of the illicit drug trade and the link to firearms. In fact, if you look at what fentanyl has done, 1 kilogram of fentanyl can now sell for $1.6 million on the market. That is compared to 1 kilogram of heroin, which sells for 80 kilograms, or for $80,000. So the profitability is driving gang warfare. Gangs are competing for turf because of the obscene amounts of money that they can make off the suffering of people in my province right across this country. So, Minister, we have an opportunity before us as policymakers. We have many notable stakeholders calling for this. Why then are we still debating whether to decriminalize drugs and treat them as the health issue that they so very rightly are?
Well, first, Mr. McGregor, I want to thank you for your advocacy on the important issue of how best to tackle opioid and substance issues, which I agree with, and I think you would hear among a great many of experts, are not always best dealt with on the front lines of our criminal justice system. And in particular, you raised the government's reform around cannabis and the efforts, the transformational efforts that were taken to take simple possession of cannabis out of the criminal justice system, because I think we all agreed that it was not an effective or efficient use of the scarce resources for our courts. And, I think your point, if I understand it correctly, is should we apply that same principle to other forms of simple possession of drugs which are under the CDSA, the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act? And, you are highlighting that a number of individuals and experts have come forward to support that position. I think we need to absolutely have that conversation. We have to do it in a way that is principled. We have to do it in a way that really looks at the evidence. And we have to do it in a way that will ensure that we are using the criminal justice system as a last resort. I mean, for people who suffer from substance challenges, I would be the first to acknowledge that simply putting someone who is an addict in jail is not going to solve the problem. What they need is support. They need treatment. They often need mental health supports. And that's why I think we need to look at ways to bridge into those other areas. But I also think, just in rounding out my answer to you, that we also do have to be mindful that there are those who are still using fentanyl and opioids, which can be very deadly for all the wrong reasons. And that is where I do believe that the criminal justice system is implicated in a way that is responsible. And I was getting at this earlier with Mr. Lloyd's question around the criminal sentencing reform. We do need to also make sure that those who are trying to visit upon innocent individuals the worst consequences through substances which are highly regulated.
I agree, Minister.
We need to reserve that space. That's my
I agree.
point for the criminal
and
justice
no one
system.
at this table or in civil society is going to dispute the fact that those who traffic in drugs and are dealing them need to be held to account. But there is a clear difference between those who are using because of the traumas they experience in their everyday life. And, my time is limited. I mean, maybe I'll just end with a statement. I mean, you talk about having this conversation. The conversation has been had for the last decade. And how many more experts, how many more statistics do we need before we take firm action on this? When people in my community go out and buy street drugs, they are playing Russian roulette with their lives. They just do not know whether that hit is going to kill them or not. But they are addicted. They have no choice. This is how they get through their day-to-day lives. So I implore you, Minister, use this moment, do the right thing, change policies so that we save lives.
Thank you. We now move into the second round of questions. And may I call on the Vice Chair of the committee, Ms. Dancho, to lead off this round.
All right. Are you all right with that? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's great to be here. Thank you, Minister, for being here again. Great to see you. Appreciate that you're a frequent flyer at this committee. But we are, of course, discussing a very serious issue of gun violence in our cities. On Friday, actually, I visited the Winnipeg Police headquarters, and they provided me with a quite an immersive tour of what they're doing on the ground to combat gang activity. And they showed me it was incredible. There was $500,000 of methamphetamines, wads of cash I've never seen so much in my life, and a whole table full of the illegal guns that they seized during this large operation. And these operations are ongoing. It's almost monthly. They're seizing this much guns, drugs, and cash. And all of the guns that they showed me on the table were already prohibited in Canada. And so I'm just not clear. I mean, your government is talking a lot about investing several $1 billion in this so-called buyback program and a proposed handgun ban, which you mentioned today. And so how are banning firearms of certain firearms in Canada going to stop the guns that I saw with my own eyes that are already banned and being used to hurt Canadians right now?
Yeah, I just wonder if you can say with certainty whether or not any of those guns were prohibited under the OIC order that the government recently introduced in the last couple of years, Ms. Dancho, and maybe you can, maybe you can't.
Specifically handguns.
Yeah, well, and so I would just simply say, again, as I said to Mr. Lloyd, that to the extent that we can, we are investing additionally to provide law enforcement the tools that they need, I'm actually quite assured that those dollars that are coming from the federal government that are being transferred to the provincial government are making their way into your community and are leading to arrests and seizures. That's a proof point, Ms. Dancho, that this government will continue to support law enforcement. But I'll just say in conclusion,
Sure.
It's not the only thing that we can do. It's not just about providing additional money to police. We also have to take additional steps to prevent gun crimes from occurring as well, and that's something that I hope to be able to expand on in my time here.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate it. And to be very fair to you, I did ask them about the federal funding they've received, and they said it's very helpful. But when I did ask about the several $billion that we anticipate the buyback will cost and the proposed handgun ban, it was, as with all law enforcement that I've talked to, both at this committee and also in person on Friday with the Winnipeg Police, seeing this on the ground, there is a great sense of frustration from police. Their resources are already strapped. They're having a hard time, as you know, dealing with rising gun violence and gun and drug trafficking in our cities. And when we speak to RCMP in rural Canada, rural crime, as you know, is a growing issue as well. So from what I'm hearing on the ground directly from police officers, there are no resources available for them to further extend themselves to now go to law-abiding citizens and remove their firearms. So are you at all concerned that the measures that your government will be implementing with a potential handgun ban and the buyback are going to severely hurt the already strapped resources of police to do their jobs right now to combat drugs and gang crime?
I take the point, Ms. Dancho. My message to you is that we need to be able to do both, that the solutions here are not mutually exclusive, that it is not just about picking one lane, that we have to invest in law enforcement, which, and I thank you for the acknowledgement, we are doing, and that's being felt by your community, and we'll continue to do that. But we also need to be sure that the guns that we are now prohibiting because they are deadly and their purpose really is only to kill people, like AR-15 and other assault-style weapons, also need to be taken out of our communities. And that is the rationale behind having a buyback program.
So one thing, what was really interesting, they've showed me a whole array of firearms that your government has called assault-style. And they showed me two, they weren't the same gun, but they had the identical firepower. They were identical in every way except for cosmetic. One of them had a wood stock, one of them had a black stock. They said the black stock one is illegal, but the exact same capability of this gun is still legal. And so there hasn't been a lot of clearly expert advice on which guns you're looking to ban. It seems to be from experts that we've talked to, from police to firearm experts, the ban you're putting in place has nothing to do with the power of a firearm, but everything to do with how scary it might look, which to me, I think is a great waste of resources, frankly. But one issue I wanted to mention to you was something that is concerning. Police are seeing guns being smuggled all the way by train, all the way from Mexico through the U.S., all the way to our cities. There's a direct line by train from Mexico to Winnipeg. And they are seeing a great increase in gun violence and illegal guns that are already prohibited in Canada seem to be smuggled in by rail. So if you could just comment, we do believe there should be more resources at our border to check. They said there was no resources to do that.
For you, Minister, 12 seconds.
We need and are investing more resources at the border. And when it comes to the ban of AR-15 and assault-style weapons, we are taking the advice of experts who know which of those categories of guns need to be banned. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, colleagues, I'm a prisoner of the clock. You know that. We now move to Mr. Chang. You have 5 minutes, not more or less, 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, and good morning, Minister. I would like to comment first, and my comment and question will be directed to the RCMP and the Public Safety and Justice folks. I had not heard about smart gun technology until this year, and I didn't know that it could be an option to have smart gun technology. In these days and age, all sort of technology are in place to secure devices. The police uses a two-factor authentication for years to protect the computers with e-token and passwords. And as you know, automobiles have all kinds of safety features in them. Back in 2018, there was a shooting which was called the Danforth shooting, where two young ladies lost their lives who were in the prime of their life. And the gun used in that shooting was stolen from a gun dealer. It was a legitimate gun which was stolen from a gun dealer in Saskatchewan in 2015. There was a subsequent lawsuit against Smith & Wesson alleging smart gun technology is more than 20 years old but has yet to be used on guns sold in the United States and Canada. So according to the lawsuit, Smith & Wesson had entered into an agreement with the U.S. government in 2000 to incorporate smart gun technology in the design of new weapons by March of 2003. That was not the case, and however, the gun that was used in the shooting of the Danforth was manufactured in 2005. And what I'd like to ask you, can you explain to this committee guns that have biometric restrictions or smart guns? How can these types of weapons limit the use? How can we limit the use of them to only the owners of these guns? And is it possible to limit them?
Thank you for that question. You know, we definitely have to leverage technology when you consider there's so much emerging technology when you talk about guns. There's chips and biometrics. In some senses they can be used for good, and in other senses they can be used for evil. We need to ensure that we look at that technology. What I would make the comparison to is years ago when we first brought in credit cards, there was no technology on credit cards, and they were used fraudulently en masse. And then when the industry started leveraging technology and bringing in preventative measures, we saw a reduction in frauds in credit card. It's obviously not the same as far as the end results, but my point being is that using technology to be able to follow the trace of a gun, to be able to find out where it came from, to disable a gun when it's been stolen, for example, or to allow an owner to be the only person to access it through biometrics would definitely increase safety with gun users. And when a gun falls into the wrong hands and being able to, for example, through technology, being able to be disabled, definitely we have to start looking at the emerging technologies and apply it to firearms.
So in essence, you're saying if those technology exists and if they were implemented, then a handgun stolen would be a paperweight in somebody's, and it would be useless to the theft.
Yeah, depending on the technology, very well could be.
Would Mr. Talala have anything to add to these points?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I am referring to the expertise of RCMP on this kind of technologies, but we consider in our policy thinking any possible incentive or ways to reduce gun violence and gun use. So we work closely with RCMP and CBSA on these matters. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Going back to the RCMP, Commissioner Lucky, most of the guns that are being used in crimes across Canada, since you're the federal police department, would you say they're mostly domestically stolen or smuggled guns that are being used in violent crimes?
Sorry about that. I'm having problems with my mute button. When we look at where firearms are coming from, in general, we say there's about 69%, 65 to 69% of the guns that we have traced are domestically.
Sorry, Commissioner, 10 seconds, please.
They're within the borders of Canada, but of the ones that we are tracing, there's approximately 13% where we've actually traced them to coming across the border.
Thank you. I'd now like to ask Ms. Michaud to take the floor for 2.5 minutes. It's all yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to talk to you about this new bill which you intend to table with new measures. C-21 didn't please a lot of people. it didn't help those who wanted a better control of guns. I'd like to hear you speak about this new bill. And do you intend to review the ban? Can you explain what the gaps were in this ban? Because some firearms had the same capacity as others, but they didn't wind up on the list. Some are prohibited, some aren't in Canada. There are semi-automatic guns, 3 of which have been put on the market in the last few weeks. So it's clear that the manufacturers of these firearms take advantage of the loopholes and they try to get around all the regulations. I had suggested to the parliamentary secretary during a debate in the House that we should perhaps look at another way of approaching the problem by defining what should be prohibited in the criminal code rather than taking this piecemeal approach, because could that be something that you would explore? That is, amend the criminal code to take this into account. Thank you for your question, Ms. Michaud. And very quickly, I would say that the government is open to your suggestion. That is, that we examine the criminal code and perhaps amend it. However, generally speaking, the new bill will resurrect some initiatives that we had tried to introduce during the last session. For example, the Red Flag Act, which is so important to deal with intimate partner violence, the Yellow Flag rule. We want to take further action on this in order to deal with handguns. We intend to collaborate with our provincial and territorial counterparts, but we will work with the MPs on this act. Thank you, Minister.
For a round of 2.5 minutes. Floor is yours. Talk fast.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just following on Ms. Michaud's line of questioning and what Ms. Dancho brought up, it is a fact that the OIC put in place in May of 2020 did ban some firearms, but there still are some that are legal which have the exact same ability to shoot. They're semi-automatic rifles. They could hold large capacity magazines, but there's a difference in appearance. I have constituents who did own the now prohibited weapons. I have constituents who own variants which are very much the same as the prohibited ones, but are still legal. And I guess a lot of them might have questions, will the government extend the OIC to ban those firearms? I guess what we're asking for, Minister, is don't you think it would be worth it to have some certainty where Parliament could have a fulsome debate on this and where the criminal code could have an actual definition of what we're dealing with here? I think these are legitimate questions.
I do too, Mr. McGregor, and I think that the short answer is that, as I said to Ms. Michaud, we are looking at a variety of options for the legislation that will come back. I'm keen to study closely the potential for looking at order and council solutions, but equally whether or not there may be some other ways which we can strengthen gun control through legislative amendments under the Criminal Code or the Firearms Act. But I just want to assure you that, contrary to what some of our colleagues in the Conservative Party may suggest around taking decisions to ban certain firearms because they look scary, that's not the way we make decisions. We make decisions on the basis of the advice that we get from experts who look at deadly force, who look at the ability to manipulate those guns to carry out even more deadly force.
I understand that, but it is a fact that there are some that are legal and some that are now prohibited, which have the exact same abilities.
And that's why, as I've said, we're certainly open to working with you and other colleagues in the chamber to look at both administrative as well as legislative solutions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will
And look,
yield
you've
to
got
the
30
committee.
seconds.
Well, by my clock, I've hit the limit. So
Okay.
over to you, Mr. Chair.
Ooh. We'll deduct 15 seconds next round. Okay, then we move to Mr. Van Topka. Sir, you have 5 minutes in this round. The floor is yours when you're ready to take it.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here. Commissioner Lucky, I want to follow up on a line of questioning that I had put to you last time you were before us, and Mr. Chang also started down. So as we develop laws and regulations that are designed to keep Canadians safe and guns out of the hands of criminals, we need to understand the problem, and for that we need to have good, reliable statistics and analysis. Now, we've heard from many witnesses, you included, about the source of crime guns, and we're getting inconsistent, even contradictory evidence. So I want to explore with you to better understand that. You said again just a short while ago that 70 or 69% of crime guns are domestically sourced. Yet we've had other witnesses say completely the opposite, that 85% of crime guns are smuggled in from the United States. So is this, you're all credible witnesses, so I'm assuming we're using different definitions of what is a crime gun, and Statistics Canada was here as well, and they said they're working on exactly that. So perhaps you could comment on that. Do we need better statistics in order to develop better laws?
Well, thank you for that question. Our statistics are based on our actual tracing of the guns. And so we have a lab that traces guns. We trace all guns except for the ones in Ontario who trace their own. They have that capability. So that might, in fact, give a different number. But of the ones that we have traced, for example, in 2021, 69% of those were domestically sourced. When we look at the 31% left over, they were either smuggled or without importer documentation. So that's based on the guns that we have actually successfully traced. So of the just over 3,000, 3,200, I think, we have successfully traced the origins in about 2,572.
Okay, good. So thank you. So there are potentially two problems with that. And the first is, the definition of a crime gun. It's been suggested by earlier witnesses that perhaps if you have a very broad definition of a crime gun to include any gun found at a crime scene, even if the crime wasn't violent, if that's included in the definition of crime gun, that's probably not all that useful. It might be a true answer, but it's not particularly useful. And another problem, of course, is that there's inconsistency in tracing of actual crime guns across the country. And it's been suggested that we need to have a national strategy for tracing all crime guns. Thanks.
Thank you. I would absolutely agree with your statement, and that's why we've recently been given money in the last budget to increase our tracing capabilities. Right now, like I said, it's about 3,200, but with the new funding, we will be able to triple our ability to trace handguns, or trace firearms, sorry. And that will do well to, because then we can make some evidence-based decisions, as you pointed out at the beginning, on the provenance of guns and where they come from. And if we come to a point where it comes from a certain area, we can deal with that very succinctly. It is not mandatory to have guns traced, but in the RCMP, we are in the midst of developing policy to make it mandatory so that any guns seized will be traced. Of course, we'll have to work with CACP as well to ensure we can, share those policies with other police agencies, because the more evidence we have on those statistics and looking at the trends, the better we are to tackle the problem.
Thank you. Is there a timeline or a strategy for developing that national policy, and are you working with Statistics Canada on that problem?
No, we've just started on the policy. You know, a lot of it is as a result of the good conversations that we have at Parliament committees such as these, where we see some of the gaps. And so we're in the development of the strategy and the policy. And you raise a good point, and I'm sure I will make sure that our people consult with Statistics Canada to ensure that any policy that we do have will be reflective. And if we can standardize it across the country, I do have a Chiefs of Police roundtable, and I'll be bringing it up to them. We like to try to speak with one voice, with a bit of flexibility, obviously, depending on your environment. But I think it would bode well if we were able to do that.
Thank you, Commissioner. And all the way from the left coast, I see Mr. McKinnon. Hope it's dry there. The floor is yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Chair. It's not good policy to comment on the rain status here. So welcome to all the witnesses. I'm very glad to see you all, and thank you for coming back and sharing your time. Mr. Minister, I wanted to go back to the ever-popular buyback program. In 2019, when our government announced the ban on assault-style weapons, the Ontario Chiefs of Police issued a statement supporting the move, saying, "In our view, these weapons have no place in our communities." And when the president of the Coalition for Gun Control testified before our committee, she made a point that stuck with me. She said, "I want to remind you that every illegal gun begins as a legal gun, either south of the border or in Canada." So, Minister, I know you've come at this question from many different angles today, but Minister, can you speak to the importance of moving forward on our proposed buyback to ensure that we reduce the number of guns which may be illegally diverted into the criminal market?
I can, Mr. McKinnon, and before I give you the substance of my answer, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the victims, the advocacy groups who've been long, I think, putting forward very thoughtful and concrete ideas to help create safer communities. I want to acknowledge them because I know that that for many that the wounds are still very deep, and I think it's important that all of us, no matter what your political stripe is, just really understand and appreciate that the perspectives that they bring forward are informed by some of the most difficult tragedies that are imaginable within our societies. And there's not certainly a day goes by that I don't ask myself, and I hope we all ask ourselves, what more is it that we need to do? And the answer for me does include making sure that we deliver on a buyback program, precisely because of the point that that you raised, that Mr. Chang raised, that many have raised, which is that guns can be diverted, whether they are initially legal or they are then manipulated to being something that is prohibited or illegal, and they can be used to devastating effect. And we heard Mr. Chang refer to it in the Danforth shooting, which is in my hometown in Toronto. We need to reduce and completely eliminate that kind of possibility from ever happening, and certainly a buyback program will help to do that.
Thank you, Minister. I have a minute and a half left. So a quick question. So regarding the buyback, I note that within 2 months, we're quickly coming to the end of the amnesty period that was included with the prohibition 2 years ago. So it doesn't seem practical in that time frame to be able to expect to be able to implement and deploy a buyback, and in addition to provide firearms owners a fair opportunity to utilize it. So can you comment on the imminence or the availability of the buyback program itself? And in particular, do you contemplate any extension to the amnesty?
There's a question around the extension that we are very preoccupied with, and certainly I do want to assure you that in the meantime, that my department, in consultation with law enforcement as well as with advocacy groups, are doing incredible and pressing work to advance a buyback initiative. Look, this will be a watershed moment for the country. We've never had a buyback program. Other jurisdictions have, and they've seen successes, and we hope to build on those successes. But we are doing this work very much from the point of view that this will be a maiden voyage. So we want to make sure that we get it right. And we are going to get it right, Mr. McKinnon. And we will make sure that there is a way to take those deadly firearms, which we have prohibited, because it was the right thing to do, out of our communities and off our streets. And my commitment to you and to all on this committee is that we will do that work together.
Thank you, Minister. Now, we now head into the third round of questioning. And to lead off is Mr. Shipley. You have 5 minutes, sir. The floor is yours.
Oops. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. We seem to be running in the same circles lately, and nice to see you here. Minister, I have some questions for you, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot. This is just for my own knowledge. I am not get heckling from my own side. That's getting awkward. I am not trying to put you on the spot. I'm trying to figure out knowledge. I am not an owner of a gun. I do not own. I do not have a possession acquisition license. Do you have your acquisition license, a PAL license?
A possession acquisition.
Yeah.
A possession acquisition license. I do not, although, as I mentioned earlier today, I think in response to Mr. Lloyd, I have visited some communities, and I have been privy to some of the education around a PAL, acquiring a PAL.
Sounds like we're similar, because I don't either. So, and I haven't shot a lot. I've shot once or twice. I don't own a gun. Have you ever shot a firearm?
Yes.
Okay. I recently went to the Barrie Gun Club, which is a large gun club situated, obviously, in my riding of Barrie, Spring, or Ormonte, not far from yourself. And we'd love to have you up sometime and tour the good people there. I'm sure they'd welcome you with open arms. But it was interesting. They laid out a whole bunch of firearms for me on a picnic table, of all things, to educate me a little bit. And I was trying to learn. And this has been talked about a little bit already today, but they were showing me different firearms that shoot the exact same, but just some had plastic barrels, some had wooden barrels. And for someone like me, who's not an avid gun owner, doesn't know a lot about them, I couldn't get my head around it why one was banned and one wasn't. You sound like you're the same level as me, perhaps, maybe more knowledgeable. I'll give you that credit, but you haven't used them as much either. Could you try to explain to me why your firearms ban has banned one and not the other? And I'll give you one more example, if I could, Minister. One of the gentlemen there who has done some help for farmers in the Oro area for 15 years with their coyotes in the springtime used, and I have to look this up because I don't know them again, a Ruger Mini 14 for many, many, many years. He's an upstanding citizen in our community and has helped farmers for free with their herds, getting rid of some coyotes in the rural area. That gun is now banned. He can't use that anymore. So this spring, he is unable to go out and help those farmers, even though he's used that gun for 15 years. Can you explain some of these differences and how someone like that could now have that firearm being banned on him?
Well, first, Mr. Shipley, I'd be happy to come and visit you and your community as at the earliest opportunity. But I would say that that the decisions made around which guns to prohibit and which ones we should not is based on a variety of factors, including, as I mentioned, deadly force, the length of the barrel, the caliber of ammunition that a gun can hold, the number of rounds in a cartridge and whether or not it's able to be discharged within a certain period of time. My point to you is that those are the types of objective criteria that go into the decision as to which guns we deem too deadly, such that they require prohibition. You may want to also ask the Commissioner of Firearms, who's also the Commissioner of the RCMP, who is a a far greater expert than I think you would agree, either you or me, but those are the types of criteria that are applied. And it's not a fixed point in time decision. I mean, I'm sure experts continue to look at those criteria in a way that is consistent with the policies, decisions that we as Parliament make, that the government puts forward for Parliament's approval.
And thank you for that. Just to follow up, all those criteria that you mentioned, again, and I am not an expert in firearms, were the exact same. The caliber, the length, the everything. One just had plastic on it and one had wood. But I'll leave it at that. And when you come up, we'll look into that and we'll get that answered ourselves, so we can look into that. I do have another question. Over this study, we have heard from some great witnesses, some just heartbreaking testimony. And one of the persons we heard from was from Dr. Callan Langman. He's an accomplished academic and physician who has written 3 different peer-reviewed journal articles. All of his articles employ different statistical models, and all of them analyze the relationship between firearm legislation and regulations, and homicides and suicides. All of them have come back with the same conclusion that firearm legislation, which includes buybacks and bans, do not lower overall homicide and suicide rates. Instead, focusing on mental health issues, drug abuse, socioeconomic factors, and other systematic factors reduce homicide rates and suicide rates. So, Minister, could you tell me then what it is that is differing between Dr. Langman and your help, perhaps yourself and your government there, and your procedures and going about this with your buybacks and your bannings of firearms?
Sorry, Minister, 15 seconds, please.
Well, it's like I said to Ms. Dancho, we have to take both strategies and put them into effect. We have, from our point of view, the need to take more action on strengthening gun controls for those guns that are deadly. And we also have to address some of the root causes that you've mentioned around mental health issues and others which lead to gun violence and to gun tragedies, and we will pursue both.
Thank you, Minister. Ms. Demoff, the floor is yours for the next 5 minutes or so.
And it's absolutely wonderful having you here in person. Thank you. I just want to follow up a little bit on my colleague's question about Dr. Langley, because I recall asking him a question when he was here, and none of his research goes past 2016. So he has not done research into Bill C-71, the extended background checks. And I know that the Doctors for Protection for Guns disputes his research. So I'm just putting that on the record. I actually have a question for Commissioner Lucky. Commissioner, we had Evelyn Fox here as a witness. She lost her child to gun violence, and she indicated that when people apply for their firearms license, that only 10% of references are checked. And she's not the first person from whom I've heard that when people are applying for their firearms license, that the background checks are not necessarily followed up on. So I'm wondering, Commissioner, if you could speak to that, please.
Thank you for that question. First of all, the new firearms license applicants are searched against police and court databases. So in order to assist a chief firearms officer in determining an individual's eligibility to hold the firearms license. And then the firearms license holders are also under the continuous eligibility screening, and the chief firearms officers are advised by police and by courts of occurrences that may affect the individual's eligibility to continue to hold the firearms licensing. And that continuous eligibility process enables, new relevant occurrences to be entered into police or court records management systems and to be compared with those who hold a firearms license. So any potential matches are sent to the chief firearms officer of jurisdiction for further investigation. And most of those decisions are to hold or continue to hold a firearms license is based
Commissioner,
on the information.
Sorry, I have really limited time, and I want to ask CBSA something too, but what about the references? So people give their partner of the previous 2 years as well as references. So I guess I'm specifically asking about those, and should we be requiring more checks on those?
Well, they are collected only on the initial application and not the renewal, and they are based on the threat, or if the file is flagged, then they can follow up and do the reference checks. Obviously, if we could do all the reference checks of every single license, that might give a better picture, but we wouldn't ever have the resources to do that type of in-depth checks on all such licenses.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. And my next question is for the CBSA. When the union appeared here, they were talking about there being an issue with rail. I know that passenger rail, we legislated that passenger rail would now go through pre-screening. So they wouldn't be referring to that. So it wouldn't be like travel like the Rocky Mountaineer. There were, I think, 3 locations across Canada where passenger rail was now allowed between Canada and the U.S. But I'm just wondering, when it comes to cargo, they seem to feel that guns were being smuggled on cargo rail. So I'm wondering if the CBSA or the RCMP would be able to comment on whether that's an issue and whether we should be looking at more screening on cargo that's brought in by rail.
Well, thank you for the question. So first of all, I'd say that the approach that we take is very much dependent on the mode. So rail mode is something where we rely on advanced commercial information, and as well with the rail lines that are trusted traders. And so the actual materials are considered in bond until they arrive in the country. So we have insights into how they maintain the security of the conveyances. And, just to put it into perspective, around 2.5 million, between 2 and 2.5 million rail cars come into the country every year. So when I look at that risk level compared to the traveler regime or other sort of modes, necessarily, and given the data and the risk profile, rail is not something that we think is as big as a risk as the union conveyed. And quite frankly, when we do interventions, we don't actually stop at the border. The intervention would happen at the first point that we could do that safely, and it very much depends on the good that's being conveyed. What we would like to do is actually start working upstream where the rail cars are assembled in the United States and target using the intelligence approach that we're focusing on right now to make sure that we're targeting the right train before it actually gets into the country.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to ask Ms. Michaud to take the floor for 2.5 minutes. It's all yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. On parlait...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We were talking about the assault rifle, military style, and the buyback program. This will be mandatory from now on. It was not like that with C-21. It was not mandatory. Thank you for being open to our definition of this kind of munition in the criminal code. This is a good solution. Now, let's talk about the prohibition of handguns. Your government decided that it was not up to him to prohibit these kinds of guns, that it was up to the municipality. In my area, there are 56 municipalities, so if there is a different regulation from one municipality to the next, we'll never get out of there. So then it was decided that it was up to the province, but no province said, yeah, let's do it. Let's prohibit handguns. Don't you think it'd be more productive and efficient if it was up to the federal government? It's the duty of the federal government to do so. Well, listen, Mrs. Michaud, I share your concerns in relation to handguns. I know that on the streets of Montreal over the last few months, it's been really tough for communities. There has been several tragedies. A lot of people lost their lives. This is not acceptable. And that's the reason why my department, my government, decided to take concrete steps. For example, financial steps, add some resources. The day before last, I announced a new program for Montreal. I did that over the last week. That's another example of the steps the government is taking for Montreal and for your province. Now, concerning the regulations for handguns, I'm always willing, and I will work together with Ministre Guilbeault in Quebec to find common solutions and what she can do under her jurisdiction. But at the same time, we have to respect the jurisdiction of the federal government as far as firearms and handguns.
Sir, you have that 2.5-minute slot. I'm sure you'll be judicious and effective.
You know I am, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Minister, we had some testimony at the beginning of this committee meeting just about the desire of your government, and I share that desire to get rid of mandatory minimums. Can you just be very clear, based on your experience as a Crown prosecutor, that there still will exist provisions in the criminal code that allows judges to modify the potential sentence based on the severity of a crime?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. There are a number of principles set out in the criminal code that do allow judges to take into account aggravating factors, which
Section 718.2.
718.2. Very,
yes.
very,
Principles of sentencing.
very precise.
I just think it's very important to get that on the record because the narrative out there seems to imply that people who are before a court being charged with a serious crime are just simply going to walk away, and I think that is very clearly false. For my next round, you had an exchange before regarding high-capacity magazines. I know it is within your mandate letter to ban the sale or transfer and also to require permanent alteration. I'm wondering, Minister, why wouldn't it just be simpler to take the route of just banning high-capacity magazines outright? Because there will always be the danger that someone with the technical know-how is going to allow them to hold more than the legal limit.
Well, I share the same concern, and I just want to assure you, Mr. McGregor, that we are looking at cartridges, and we are taking a look at magazines, and we are looking very carefully, as we did in the last session, at creating new laws to prohibit the alteration of magazines, which would allow for a greater number than is permissible. To be precise, we're open to working with you and others on that question. We will also take the advice that we're getting from the Commissioner of Firearms and other experts on how best to proceed. But as you say, there's a very clear requirement within my mandate that we look at this issue very carefully and that we proceed with legislative reform where we can, and where there are other ideas, then we will listen very carefully and take the advice of experts on that.
Thank you, Minister.
I took that extra 15 seconds, Chair.
You did.
He did.
We're even. Anytime I can play you even, sir, I'm happy. Ms. Vecchio, welcome to our committee.
Thank you very much.
We're so glad to have you here.
You may decide you don't want me after I'm done today.
Well,
but anyway, it's
we're going to
wonderful
find out over the next few minutes.
We will.
Go ahead.
It's wonderful to be here with you all today. I want to go back a little bit to when you did put the order in council in 2020 following the horrific shooting in April of what we saw in Nova Scotia, and then also seeing the horrific incidences that are happening in your communities, like in downtown Toronto as well as Montreal. I'm very concerned, though, because I do believe that we talk about this gun buyback. We talk about, here's the order in council. We're taking away these guns. But I notice a lot of times we talk about violence against women and firearms. And I'm very concerned because sometimes I think we're selling people a bill of goods, that we're going to fix this if we do this. And so I'm going to start off with very simply. In 2018, there was just under 600 victims of police-reported intimate partner violence involved in incidents where a firearm was present, up from 401 in 2013. What is being done to ensure firearms are not in play when it comes to domestic and intimate partner violence?
I share your concern, Ms. Vecchio, and maybe you'll just allow me a moment to explain why this is. I don't want any member of this committee to think that simply by way of introducing bans that we solve the problem entirely. It may help. The government's firm belief is that it will help. But we need to do more than just ban firearms. We do need to also ensure that there is appropriate investment in law enforcement at our borders and in our communities. And as you heard from Ms. Dancho and others within your own ranks, the federal funds are being felt within the community, and that's good. We should acknowledge that. That is not a partisan point. That is an important fact. But we also need to address root causes. And on intimate partner violence, I mean, you pointed out yourself that there were some 660 reports and incidents where a gun was present.
Yeah.
That's up 60% from 2013. So one of the solutions that we're looking at is the introduction of red flag and yellow flag laws.
I want to talk about this a little bit because I do really respect the fact I go through those applications. I've applied for my possession acquisition license. I've done all of these things too. But I think my problem is we all want to get rid of violence against women. We all want to do that. And we saw on the shoulders of this, the government come out with the Order in Council, which to me, whatever. But to me, I'm looking at some of the statistics from just about 10 years ago, and 4% of those guns in domestic violence were registered. Only 24% of those people had a possession acquisition license. So I guess my problem is the government's trying to fix something where this stuff is already illegal. We're talking about the bad people that are using illegal weapons. We're talking about a person who would impact their family by killing their own family member with a gun. So we are talking about a mental health issue here for sure. I'm wondering why we're putting so much money into a buyback where illegal people and bad people are still going to be doing these things, and why we're not taking that money and putting more into resources for violence against women and for CBSA as well as mental health. Why are we not doing that instead? Why are we not going directly to the core and just assuming this is going to fix it?
Well, Ms. Vecchio, I would submit to you that we are doing both. That we are both investing in greater law enforcement capacity to go after organized crime and those who would commit intimate partner violence or gender-based violence against women. And we are also addressing some of the root causes by investing more in mental health, by investing more in affordable housing, in greater health care. Mm-hmm. But to specifically answer your original question, like within the context of this portfolio, we are introducing important measures like red flag and yellow flag laws, which allows guns to be taken out of the hands of somebody who may pose a direct threat to women and girls.
Fair enough.
And that is a tool and an instrument that we hope to enact as quickly as we can.
And I really appreciate that. I think the thing is we have to do more at the very beginning. When you talk about the root cause, that is where we're going to do. And I just find with this government, there's a real reactionary tone. A lot of times, well, this happened, so 10 days later we're going to do this. And I don't find that that's the way that, did you actually get all of the data to support that? Oh, 30 seconds, thank you. So I guess my thing is, at the end of the day, will this buyback actually, do you think it will have that impact on violence against women, as you were noting back in 2020 when this came out?
Yes. And my view is supported by the advice that we've gotten from law enforcement, particularly as it relates to AR-15 and assault-style firearms. That was supported by the rank and file as well as executives of law enforcement, and the extension of introducing a ban on that is.
And I appreciate that, but when I'm saying that 4%, when I'm only saying 4% of them are illegal,
this is an opportunity to let you both know you're both out of time.
Well, I'll take them out later and we'll talk about it then.
Colleagues know that I don't negotiate extra time very well. Mr. Zuberi, you have the next slot and you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Minister, for being here and all the witnesses. I'm gonna focus my questions around upstream, downstream, and diversity inclusion generally. I'd like to start off with Commissioner Leckie. We heard previously in our testimony from Assistant Professor Robert Henry, who was with the Department of Indigenous Studies at the University of Saskatchewan. He said that that hiring more Indigenous officers without changing the culture of policing itself does not make a bit of difference. I'm just wondering, for the RCMP, I'm sure that you are tuned into the question of indigeneity, of being culturally sensitive to Indigenous people. I'd like to just hear from you whether or not, to what extent is the RCMP focused on the issue of Indigenous people, and whether or not to what extent is the force culturally sensitive?
Thank you for that question, and your comments are well taken, because you can't just assume that if you bring in more Indigenous people into the organization, that they will see themselves within the organization. You have to provide the opportunities to promote within the rank and file, the opportunities to become a leader, the opportunities to training and promotion. So it's all about changing the culture and providing that most inclusive culture so that people can, first of all, in recruitment, see themselves within the organization, but that they feel a part of the organization where they can thrive, not just survive. So they need to thrive within the rank and file to become a future leader and hopefully a future commissioner.
Certainly. We also heard about, so you touched briefly upon culture, changing culture within the police force. Can you elaborate a bit more upon that?
Yes, absolutely. When I got into the chair, I brought in what we call Vision 150, and it's all about, from a start to finish, bringing in the right people and then making sure they're properly trained, and they're trained with, empathy, and bringing in programs that address issues within our society, such as within the BIPOC communities with vulnerable people, teaching them how to deal with that, as well, providing opportunities for people when things don't go right, that they have a place where they feel safe, where they feel trusted, that they can go to. So we've brought in a new Independent Center for Harassment. We brought in an RCMP Indigenous Cooperation and Collaboration and Accountability Office, where it's not just for collaboration with outside of the organization, but it allows a venue for Indigenous members to come forward if they are not feeling that they're being treated with fairness, and where we can be more transparent and provide them with the opportunities.
And we heard also from the president of the Winnipeg Police Service, Maurice Soborn. He spoke about how the resources, he would like to see more resources for intervention. Do you have any programs that deal with intervention to prevent upstream into gangs that will obviously help mitigate the gun crimes that we're talking about?
Right. No, that's a great question. We have a great program I'd like to highlight in BC. It's called the Gang Intervention and Exiting Team, and it provides that support to the high-risk individuals, who are engaged in gang programs or gang activities. And what this does is it empowers those that are involved in gangs to exit. And so it has counseling services, life coaching, education, employment, programming, mental health supports. And we've seen over 20 people in the last couple of years exit gangs because of the support that they received through this gang intervention and exiting team strategy.
Thank you. I'd like to turn it now to the minister around programs relating to upstream, essentially preventing people from entering gangs, and downstream, I should say, helping people to exit gangs. Minister, do you have any, would you like to share about any programs, policies to those two ends?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Suberi. It allows me to highlight that our government in budget 2018, we invested $327.6 million over 5 years, with $100 million ongoing to establish the initiative to take action against gun and gang violence. We actually increased in 2019 funding for this initiative to $358.8 million. I would also point out, Mr. Suberi, that the government has allocated $250 million to the Building Safer Communities Fund for those communities who have seen a disproportionate amount of gun violence. So lots of good resources there, which we will dispense in partnership with communities.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, I'm looking at the clock. The last round is 25 minutes, which would take us a few minutes past 2 o'clock. With your permission, I'll go that way, or I could cut a minute off everybody and we'll finish exactly at 2. So what's your preference? Do we go to 5 after 2 and get everybody through in this round? You okay with that, everybody? Well, it'll be 5 minutes late. I'm at your disposal. Is that acceptable?
I know if it
let's
spills
go.
over into QP, I won't be getting any question from my critics.
Yeah.
If she's still here.
No, there'll be lots of time to go from
there'll be
one
plenty
place
of time
to the
for
other,
that.
Minister.
That's right.
Okay, so Ms. Dancho, I think the floor is yours, and you can take your full 5.
Thank you very much. I did want to follow up on the issue of rail. When I was at when I spoke to the Winnipeg Police on Friday, they showed me the map of guns that they've traced from Mexico, from all over the U.S. There is a direct rail line from Mexico through the U.S. right up to Winnipeg. We have something called Centerport, where we have a massive amount of rail cars coming in. And police explained that they do not have the capacity to check all these rail cars. We also heard from CBSA, their union representing their border agents, that they don't have the capacity to search all the rail cars. Police were very keen to express to me that there is a rising amount of drug smuggling and gun smuggling. Compared to even 5 years ago, it's substantially increased, and it's increasing at an exponential rate. So I would ask, I appreciate the funds your government has given to the border agents. That's fantastic. However, given that this is a growing issue, I would just say that I think the $1 billion that your government may be proposing for the handgun ban or the buyback, there would be much more of an impact to public safety if we could search rail cars at a higher capacity, which is where police are saying illegal firearms and illegal drugs are coming in.
Thank you, Ms. Dancho. In brief, we hope with the additional funds that we have set aside for CBSA that there will be more guns that are interdicted and stopped at the border regardless of mode of transportation. I would take you back to what President Ozowski said about moving upstream and working closely with American partners to identify the sources of where those guns are coming from and being more pinpointed and targeted, whether it's rail or whether it's by land or by sea. You may want to put an additional question to him about that. But the technology and the networks that we are leveraging with our American partners, I think, is a key part of the strategic plan that we have to stop guns from entering into the country regardless of mode.
Yeah, no, thank you, Minister. No, and I do appreciate, like I said, the investments made. I just feel that $1 billion can make the world of a difference for stopping this growing issue that's increasing in capacity as the days and years go by. And I saw it firsthand with my own eyes. Another issue is, of course, youth diversion programs. Your government has also invested money in that, which I appreciate. But we've been hearing from organizations on the ground that they have yet to see a significant amount of that 5-year investment. I think it was $250 million. That hasn't quite trickled down and is having the effect, I think, that your government had hoped. And we heard from Marcel Wilson, for example, who is an ex-gang member, used to smuggle firearms almost at an organized crime professional level into Canada, pretty much an expert in this regard. We also heard from the Bear Clan, which is an Indigenous matriarch-led organization at the grassroots in Winnipeg. They're saying, just because something is banned, we're not going to anticipate any illegal criminals or any criminals that are handling these guns illegally, that own them illegally, that possess already prohibited firearms. No one anticipates, and I've asked you this question before, that any criminal is going to hand over their guns to you. And I haven't seen any evidence to suggest otherwise. But the point that they were making, we're saying if your government is going to spend billions of dollars, please give it to us so we can divert youth from going into gangs. Now, that would really have an impact long-term on gun violence if we can inject $1 billion, for example, rather than into the buyback and the handgun ban, into youth diversion programs. And so I think it's urgent, and I would much rather see your government divert that money to youth diversion programs.
Ms. Dancho, I'm very eager to make the full use of the $250 million, which has been allocated under the Building Safer Communities Fund. And I assure you, my department and me, and we spoke about this last week as well with our provincial and territorial partners, will make sure that that money has a positive impact to reduce gun violence. I'll also just say that the over $350 million that we have used to tackle guns and gang violence is not just about enforcement. Some of that money is also being used, as you've heard at this committee, to great effect, and even in your own community of Winnipeg, to be used as a preventative strategy as well. So we will do both.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I hope that you keep on and make sure that money gets to the grassroots level, and I think we can use more. Just my last 30 seconds, Chair, I would like to say I do have a growing concern that redirecting already limited police resources to going and enforcing this buyback program to target law-abiding citizens who have legally owned their firearms, and they're now going to be illegal within the coming weeks. I'm greatly concerned of the impact that will have on public safety, that we're taking limited police resources away and diverting them to something that's not really going to have much of an impact from the experts we've
Minister,
heard. So I just wanted
quickly,
to caution that. That's my concern, Minister. Thank you.
Take 10 seconds, Minister.
We will both invest in law enforcement as part of that, ensure that the buyback program gets deadly guns off of our streets and out of our communities while also preventing gun crime.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chang, you're up next. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
My apologies. Give me a moment, please. I lost my thought here. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. And my question is directed to the Minister. We heard from a number of witnesses that there are gaps in the data that we collect on the use of firearms and the violence they inflict. While this study has focused on guns and gang, if we take a broader public health approach, we know that firearms can be used as a cohesive tool by intimate partners or be used by individuals who die by suicide. After hearing from witnesses regarding gaps that exist, I want to get your opinion on the Government of Canada's creating and funding an interdisciplinary National Centre of Excellence dedicated to collecting Canadian-specific data and conducting research on firearms violence.
Thank you, Mr. Chang, for the question, and I agree we have to invest in institutions like the one that you have just described so that, among other things, that we are collecting the best available data that can show the path forward to reducing intimate partner violence, that can show how other communities have been disproportionately impacted by guns and gang violence. We are going to make the investments into those institutions. We're going to make the investments that are necessary to collect that data, and we are going to work very closely with law enforcement and victims groups and other stakeholders so that we put into place the strategies that will have the best and most positive impact possible.
Thank you, Minister. My question is now to the CBSA. Mr. Oskowski. Earlier, just to follow up with Ms. Demoff's questions about trains originating from the U.S., and you had mentioned about it's best for you to be at the point of origin to inspect those trains before they're being loaded. Do we have an agreement with the United States in regards to our CBSA officers being down in the U.S. to inspect those freight trains?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we actually have an overarching pre-clearance agreement. So if you've traveled to the United States, you'll know that when you're at a Canadian airport, you can be pre-cleared into the United States. That agreement is reciprocal. And we're looking at doing something where we would position our officers in the United States and using intel to target a particular conveyance before the train gets assembled, and it gets a lot more difficult to deal with it.
Thank you so much. Then on saying that, do you have the adequate tools and technology to manage these issues?
Well, certainly one of the things that the current strategy is focusing on is the intelligence and working with our law enforcement partners to understand the criminal routings. And that's the key part then that would drive us to look at a certain conveyance over another. So that's where we're really focusing, is upstream before it gets into Canada.
Thank you so much. Do I have some more time left?
Only if you want it.
Okay. One more question for
some time to the committee. I'll take it.
One more question for the RCMP.
Okay.
Commissioner Lackey, you had mentioned about the gang program out in BC that was very effective. Are there any proposal of getting these programs across to the other provinces in Canada?
Thank you for that question. Obviously, many of the areas that we police are very small rural communities, so we try to centralize such programs into the bigger centers. Obviously, if we could, at every major city. I know a lot of the municipal police agencies have that. Anytime we get something like this gang intervention and exiting team, we share it with all of the divisions across the country so that they can, in fact, maybe they can't do a full-blown type program where they are doing it in the Lower Mainland, but they can take parts of it and work with that interagency approach, because it's much better when we work with the other agencies such as, education, health, housing, and social services, because that interagency approach through a hub model is much more effective.
Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Thank you. Ms. Michaud, you have 2.5 minutes.
Madame Michaud, 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank the witnesses who have come here today. Madam Commissioner, you are often available to us, and we like to ask the minister questions when he shows up. During the election campaign, your government said that the provinces would manage some programs. We'll give them $1 million. And this $1 billion, pardon me, this $1 billion was earmarked for the buyback program. And you said that this program it was going to eat up a lot of this money. So I'm curious, could you tell us or give us a breakdown of this $1 billion program and give us a breakdown of how the money is going to be spent and on which program? Thank you once again for your question, Ms. Michaud. The government will invest $1 billion in concrete action with respect to handguns. We will use this funding in cooperation with the provinces. On our side, the funding may be used by the provinces and the territories as they see fit, but we have to engage with them as to what type of program they would like to set up with respect to handguns. So we have to engage. We have to have a dialogue in good faith to come up with concrete solutions that will have an impact on the ground. But we have to respect the opinions of the community, such as yours, in order to come up with a strategy that works well. I'll take the time remaining to ask you 10 seconds. Thank you. Maybe we'll have an opportunity to continue this conversation later on.
2.5 minutes to you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Minister, I just want to read you a quote from the Canadian Association of Emergency Physicians, and this is with respect to the proposed red flag law. They said, and I quote, "Placing the onus on a family member of a depressed person, a demented parent, or the perpetrator of domestic violence to go through the court system is a largely unworkable and unwelcome hindrance to getting guns temporarily out of the home of those in crisis," end quote. They're not the only organization that has raised concerns with the proposed law and placing the onus on someone to go through a court system which can take its time. Would your government be open to changing the law so that there's an automatic prohibition and that families are saved that process? And also, because I want to front load my questions to give you time to answer, my second question is just on the National Criminal Intelligence System. We did have testimony from the RCMP who did say that the system is built on a platform that is decades old. It no longer serves the very effective purposes of exchanging, developing, and sharing intelligence between police services. What will your government be doing to address those gaps?
Well, if it's okay, Mr. McGregor, I'll take your last question first because I think I can cut to the chase and then expand a little bit on your first question. But we'll continue to make the investments that are necessary to upgrade and modernize our our technology platforms so that we're gathering the data that we need in conjunction with law enforcement, and happy to offline with you more about that. With regards to your first question and the concerns that you expressed on behalf of emergency physicians, and you were quite right that they are not the only group that has expressed a concern around the potential outing and vulnerabilities that victims and those who face gun violence and violence generally that is gender-based. I am very sensitive to that. And we are going to work with you, and we're going to work with all parliamentarians to make sure that we get our red flag and yellow flag regime right. I am concerned about ensuring that victims are empowered, that they can come forward when they choose to, but that in no way compromises their personal safety or integrity. So we're going to work on it together.
Thank you, Minister. We have 5 minutes left, and we'll have 2 more questions of 3 minutes each, which means that we will end within 1 minute of on time. And that depends on your efficiency, Mr. Lloyd. The floor is yours.
Minister, in an exchange with Mr. McGregor earlier today, we were talking about high-capacity magazines. Minister, are you aware that high-capacity magazines are banned in Canada and have been for quite some time?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know, because by the rhetoric that we're hearing, it seems that people seem to be unaware that this has been banned. My next question is, you stated earlier that frontline police officers support your gun buyback policy, and yet the National Police Federation, which is the largest union of frontline personnel, has said that your gun buyback program is going to take away critical resources and is not going to be effective. So how can you back up your claim that most frontline police officers support your policies when the union that represents them has come out and said they do not support these policies?
Well, Mr. Lloyd, I think my point to you is that in consultation with many rank and file, as well as executive members of law enforcement, that there is support
Certainly
for the
there's
buyback
support amongst
program.
individual members, but when we're talking about the statement of the union that represents most frontline personnel, I mean, that is a statement on behalf of all of those frontline members. I mean, that's a pretty compelling statement.
I think by your own acknowledgement in your own words and the question you just put to me that there are different views, one by the union that you just referred to, as well as the views of other rank and file members, as well as executive members of law enforcement. My point to you is simply that the government believes that the buyback program is a responsible way to get deadly guns off of our streets and out of our communities.
And my final time, Minister, you know, May 1st is coming very quickly, and I know a lot of legal firearms owners are very concerned that they're going to become criminals as of May 2nd. Can you guarantee to Canadian firearms owners that if your buyback program's not up and running by May 1st, that they're not going to be made criminals because of your government's inability to get this program going?
Mr. Lloyd, I think this committee appearance has largely been an example of how we can have reasonable debate. We don't agree on gun control, you and I, your party and my party and our government. Let's be candid about that. But the idea that somehow that we're criminalizing law-abiding gun owners does not advance that debate. That's not
well, that's an
what we're
honest
doing.
question. It's coming on May 1st. What's going to happen on May 2nd, Minister? This isn't about rhetoric. It's a straight-up question.
Thank you very much. Minister, I'll give you 10 seconds to close this off.
We will work with those individuals who were previously in lawful possession of banned and prohibited firearms to make sure that we can transition to the new regime, which has been in place since March 2020.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Zuberi, you have the last slot, and that's 3 minutes. Take the floor, please, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. I want to turn back the floor again to the Minister around upstream and downstream programs. I know you were elaborating on this. I'd like to hear if you have more. And as Madame Michaud said, we don't have you every day at committee, so just want to give you that space and time, please.
No, I
appreciate. We did just to preface a little bit. We did hear, for example, from Keep Six that helps those who lived in the gang lifestyle to get out of gangs, and so I just those types of programs are so meaningful. And I personally feel that these programs help make our country safer. And soften the edge of which we must have around the justice system and around policing. So just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
No, you are absolutely right, Mr. Zuberi, and I think it is the kinds of organizations that have come before this committee that give you a real-life illustration of how we can take federal investments and translate that into safer communities. I think about the various investments that we have made to reduce gun and gang violence. The Building Safer Communities Fund, which I am extremely committed to seeing have a positive impact in our communities, but also to then, once that funding is there, to get out of the way. I mean, I think we in government have to really make way for young people across a wide array of communities who are best positioned to offer some solutions around mentoring each other. I mean, I often hear within my own community that those who have had experience within gangs, but who have rehabilitated, are really well positioned to offer advice and consultation and support, as well as others that work within the community. So I think we have to create those spaces, and they're not just bricks and mortar and actual physical spaces. We've got to make sure that we are giving a seat to the table to the people who live within communities, who feel in a very visceral way the negative impact of gun violence on a daily basis, so that they can drive those solutions, so that they can take those leadership roles. That's how we're going to reduce gun crime, in my view, and my commitment is to work with you and with all parliamentarians to ensure that that happens.
Thank you so much.
Colleagues, that was a very substantial and important conversation, and I thank you all for it. I haven't been around parliamentary committees very long, at least not as a member, and certainly not as a chair, but this to me is a wonderful example of how Parliament ought to be working. So thank you all very much for that. Minister, you've been so generous with your time. The motion said 3 hours on this subject. You gave 3 hours and 20 seconds. So on behalf of all of us, thank you very much. I know how intense this time is for you. Members of the committee, thanks for a job well done. See you all Thursday. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.